Point at AFR.net.
I knew at that time of the statute which authorized you and you alone to authorize subpoenas and take those actions.
Sure.
So you could have anticipated there'd be a subpoena to the press.
No, not necessarily. There are leak investigations that are done very frequently where interaction with the press does not occur.
Again, bringing you some live video and audio from Capitol Hill, where Eric Holder is doing his song and dance for members of the House Oversight Committee. And again, he's in big trouble because he authorized, or somebody in his department authorized, this invasion of the work that the Associated Press was doing, tapped 20 lines, as many as 100 journalists, reporters affected by this. And I mentioned before the bottom of the break is that he was interviewed on NPR yesterday by Kerry Johnson, and he was asked, well, how many times have you done this? How many times has the Department of Justice done this thing, getting records of the work of journalists? And he says, I don't know. This is a quote. I'm not sure how many of those cases I have actually signed off on. So he says, look, the implication is it's so many, I don't even remember. It's got to be a lot. I can't even keep track of how many I've signed off on. And notice he says how many I have signed off on. He doesn't say that there weren't other people in the Department of Justice that signed off on this intrusive business. And to help us kind of sort through, and the media is really picking up on this story, this particularly the deal with the Associated Press, that is just teeing them off. Got a story on Politico today, 52 media groups sent a letter protesting what the administration had done. And here to help us kind of sort through some of this is Dan Gainor. Dan Gainor is the T. Boone Pickens Fellow and Vice President of Business and Culture for the MRC Media Research Center. And Dan, welcome back to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
It's a pleasure to be back here, Brian. How are you?
Good, Dan. And I just want to tell you again, but as we get started, just how much I depend on the Media Research Center. I'm on your various websites, whether it's Newsbusters, MRC, on your websites multiple times every single day. I'm like Eric Holder. I can't keep track of the number of times I've gone to the MRC website. I could not do this show without the work that you guys do. So I want to tell you how much I appreciate what you guys are doing.
Well,
there.
thank you. But and much like Eric Holder, you might get criminally investigated.
Well, and that's the interesting thing, and more is coming out, Dan, and I want you to comment on this. You've got a column, by the way, up at Fox News, foxnews.com, went up yesterday. The title of your piece is Obama Loses Mainstream Media Support as Benghazi IRS and AP Scandals Grow. This is an amazing thing, Dan, where you got all three of these scandals blossoming into full flower at the same time.
Well, yeah, and this is the big danger. What happened for Obama, he had Benghazi, and he was pretty successfully fending off the Benghazi scandal until we discovered that his own press guy, Jay Carney, had lied to the press about the editing of the talking points. So the media were all set to jump on Jay Carney on Friday. And then what happened was the IRS announcement came loosely out from Lerner that afternoon. So they asked 46 tough questions of Carney on Friday and 3 wimpy other questions. They were almost all the questions were about Benghazi and the talking points, but there were some about the IRS scandal. Then over the weekend, we discovered, well, it turns out the IRS scandal was a lot worse, and it's massively worse than we thought. And then we find out about Associated Press, and so suddenly the media, who are, they're really important to Obama and his success, they feel like they are not only being lied to, but now they're being investigated, and they don't take kindly to that. So that puts them in an odd position where they're on the same side of the Tea Party.
Well, let me ask you this question, Dan. We found out this morning, for instance, Franklin Graham said, look, they audited the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association right on the heels of Billy Graham coming out and endorsing natural marriage on the ballot in North Carolina. They voted on amending their constitution to elevate protection for man-woman marriage to their state constitution. Billy Graham came out, basically endorsed it, encouraged people to vote for it. And not long after that, 3 of the Billy Graham ministries get audited. So it's just hard not to think that this is, just exactly what the IRS has admitted it is. These are politically targeted investigations. But I think, Dan, or audits, But I think, you look at the IRS going after conservative groups, and I would think a lot of people in the media, they're not happy with that. They don't like it. They've complained about it. But at the same time, Dan, that's the Obama going after them, the Tea Partiers, the conservatives, the Bible thumpers, the Constitution folks. But when Obama goes after the Associated Press, that's Obama coming after us, and that makes it a different kettle of tuna.
Yeah, well, journalists are notoriously narcissistic. Their world is very circumscribed, their world. And when media people lie to them and then criminally investigate them, they tend to get pretty offended. And at the same time, they're history buffs, a lot of them. And the linkage, and you've seen a lot of pundits and people saying what Obama's doing is Nixonian with the IRS. I mean, it flat out is. I mean, this is one of the impeachment, points for Nixon was that he used the IRS against opponents, and that just makes a very bad combo. As I refer to my column, I referred to them as each a separate brush fire. But if they get, I'm the son of a firefighter. If you get 3 brush fires and they all connect, you got real problems, and that's right now where Obama's headed.
Well, let me ask you this question. You make the comment, and I want to ask you where you see this thing heading in just a minute, but you have this statement in the middle of your piece. The Huffington Post and the rest of the media are fickle and still love Obama. So, I'm just kind of curious to see what you think, Dan, about kind of where the line is going to be drawn for them. I mean, how far do you think the media will be willing to go with Richard Nixon? Search and destroy, take him out, decapitate him, neutralize him, run him out of office. I don't know that they've got the kind of antipathy for Barack Obama, even though the scandal we may be dealing with here is even worse. So how far do you think the media will go if it begins to endanger his presidency?
Well, the first thing many people will do, and they may not all be standard traditional media people, but many people are looking right now to see if they can find advances on the AP scandal and on the IRS scandal. Well, I mean, whether it's Franklin Graham, a lot of organizations have come out, a lot of individuals have come out and said that they think they might have been targeted too. Some people didn't even go ahead and form the groups they wanted to form because the IRS was such a pain in the butt. This is so on that level, the IRS scandal is continuing to grow. But if they can go and find more examples, as you were talking about with Holder, more examples where the government has been investigating journalists, lying to journalists, doing things like that, that is where he's in danger of losing what Lisa Myers said, today, in fact, on Morning Joe, said the effect of scandal is to turn one of the president's most important constituencies, the press and the left, against him. Now, that's funny because she didn't differentiate between the press and the left by saying one, and that's generally, there's not a difference, except when the media are the target. Then the press becomes a free agent.
That was, I thought, an interesting kind of almost Freudian slip on her part, essentially identifying the media as part of the constituency that props up and supports Obama. And I'm just looking, and then I want to read one excerpt from your column and ask you for a final comment. I'm looking at this piece by Politico, Mike Allen and Jim Vanderhey. It begins this way: the town is turning on President Obama, and this is very bad news for this White House. Obama's aloof, mean, and holier-than-thou rhetoric have left him with little reservoir of goodwill, even among Democrats and the press. After years of being accused of being soft on Obama, now has every incentive to be as ruthless as can be. So they're saying it's almost sort of like payback time for the media with Obama. Chains are off. They can go after him. And here's how you finish your column, Dan, talking with Dan Gainor, Vice President of Media Research Center. The press can no longer say the Obama scandals are a case of smoke but no fire because they are getting burned too. There's a hellacious amount of fire, and it's spreading. If Obama can't contain it, the fires will merge into one mighty conflagration and light up just how awful his administration has been to the press and opponents. So here's a question I've got for you. We got about 2 minutes left. Here's a question I've got for you, Dan. We've got these brush fires going. You're warning of the dangers of them kind of coalescing into one big giant fire. And here's the question for you. Do you think these brush fires are just going to singe the furniture or these brush fires going to burn down his house? How do you see this playing out?
Well, I mean, right now I see the IRS scandal the biggest potential scandal, even though no one was killed, and the Benghazi scandal far worse in that way. But the government clearly didn't kill the individuals in question. I mean, but for the government to use the supposedly neutral parts of our government against its citizens, and maybe more than just the IRS, it's every person's nightmare. It's when the government stops being a benevolent government. It's why the founders rebelled. So that scandal has the potential to be truly Nixonian. I mean, so that could take him down, and then the fact that he's targeted the press, that just keeps giving them reason to go after him.
So by take him down, last question, got about 45 seconds. Would that mean impeachment? Would it mean
they'd have to find a true smoking gun? And even now, in this video age that we've got, it's possible, but I don't see that. I don't see the GOP going to that lengths unless they really have the goods. Video.
You would see this as something that more would kind of cripple him for the remainder of his second term.
And guarantee that the GOP wins big in 2014.
Our guest has been Dan Gainor. He is the T. Boone Pickens Fellow and Vice President of Business and Culture for the Media Research Center. Extremely valuable source of information. And I want to thank Dan. Dan, as always, very informative. You can find his column at foxnews.com on all of this. Appreciate your time, Dan. Thank you very much for your perspective and insight.
You have a great afternoon.
You too. Dan Gainor, Vice President for Business and Culture at the Media Research Center. So Dan Gainor's feeling is this probably not going to lead to impeachment. We don't have the smoking gun yet. And yet it is likely to cripple him for the remainder of his presidency, which is going to be intriguing for the Democrats because, in 1974, after Nixon resigned, instead of resign or be impeached, it was a bloodbath for the Republican Party in 1974, complete, total bloodbath. Carter gets elected in 1976. Pretty serious electoral consequences for all of this. Interesting to see how the Democrats respond. 888-589-8840. Give us a call.